here's the question. Question is, what is so special about our brains, right? What enables us to do all the cool things that we do that animals aren't doing? How come we're studying them and they're not studying us? No offense, Charlie, you're wonderful. But, okay, so we share, I guess you guys heard Liz Spelke recently, wonderful. I'm sure she covered much of this, but we share with other animals lots of abilities, from basic perceptual and motor abilities to higher level things like how we find our ways in familiar environments, how we recognize individuals and their facial expressions, and how we represent and understand approximate numerical magnitude. Okay, so those things are not humanly unique. Those are things that we share with animals. And that's a good thing, because it means we can study them in animal models. Okay? But there are lots of other things that we can do that we are pretty much the only animals that can do it, or the only animals that do it in anything like the way we do, like most obviously producing and understanding language, creating and appreciating music. Birdsong doesn't count on either front. And thinking about other people's thoughts. Okay? And solving complex problems that we've never encountered before. Okay, that's a little squishy. It's not like chimps can't solve any problems at all. I don't have a precise definition of how novel, but surely what we're doing is a whole different ballpark of solving novel problems that you see in any other animal. Okay? So question is, what is it about the human brain that enables us to do these things while other animals can't? Okay? All right. So it seems like the basic biology of brains is pretty similar across mammals. And that includes all kinds of things, pretty much everything people have looked at. From synaptic physiology to neuronal cell types. You slice up dead human brains and you slice up dead chimp brains, and they look really, really similar, right? There's loose talk about certain classes of neurons that were supposed to be uniquely human. It doesn't seem to be holding up. Basically, they're really, really similar. You have layered cortex in all mammals. Very recently, in the last couple of years, a bunch of papers have come out looking at gene expression in human brains. This is super exciting. First finding was that gene expression across the human brain has regional variation. And that overall, the genes that are expressed in the human brain, a third of them are different from the genes expressed in rodent brains. So much for mouse models of autism. But interestingly, 95% of them are the same as in macaques. Okay? Okay, so it seems unlikely that the key differences between human brains and animal brains is at this basic biological level. It also doesn't seem to be just brute brain size. Right? So whale brains and Neanderthal brains are larger than human brains. And maybe the whales are doing all kinds of cool stuff, but I don't think they are building a cumulative culture or constructing things like Notre Dame or the Bach cello suites or the theory of relativity. Right? So what is it about us that enables us to do these things and to enable us to be studying everyone else rather than them studying us? Okay. So here are my wild speculations about brain basis of human uniqueness. I mean, nobody knows the answer to this, so we can just toss stuff off. Okay, so first I'd say there are many regions of our brain that seem quite clearly homologous to regions in animal brains. Okay, so lots of people work on this, and if you look at V1, you can see in the cellular structure of V1, it is the same across mammals, right? There are many, many distinctive properties of V1. It's a homologous structure. That thing is the same, okay? And beyond that, even some higher level areas appear to be the same. So here's some work that we're just writing up right now by Rosa Leifer-Souza in my lab. Oops, that's an S on the Souza, not a Z. And Bevel Conway. They had previously shown that in monkeys, you have this systematic organization in the temporal lobe of monkeys in which you have face selectivity and then color selective region and then place selective regions in 3 parallel bands running down the side of the temporal lobe, like that, okay? Well, we've been scanning humans in these in similar experiments, and we're finding a very similar organization, but on the bottom surface of the brain. So again, you see face, color, and scene selective cortex. The blue stuff is the activations for the color selective cortex. And we find that in pretty much every subject. So it seems like there's just these 3 bands on the lateral surface in monkeys, and in the same order, 3 bands on the ventral surface in humans. And so we are making the argument, not 100% watertight, but I think a pretty good argument that this whole system, it's like a suspicious coincidence, right? It looks like this whole system migrated around on the bottom surface of the brain, maintaining its same spatial configuration, and is hence homologous across species. Right, now remember, homologous means inherited from a common ancestor. It doesn't mean just kind of similar, right? Inherited from a common ancestor. So this doesn't nail it, but I think it's pretty suggestive, okay? Well, so who cares whether it's homologous or not? Well, one, I think it matters for the use of animal models to understand these systems, right? So we are stymied in all kinds of ways in studying the human brain. All these fancy things that everyone else in this building can do on their rats and their marmosets and their macaques, we can't do on human brains, right? They can do all this stuff we can't, and so we really need to be able to learn from them, and the best way to learn from them is if we can discover like really homologous structures so that the results they get in animals can be directly imported to humans, and so it helps to have an homology for that enterprise. And the other reason is it's just damned interesting to understand the evolution of the human brain and what things are similar. Okay, so that's a little sidebar on some of these things, primary sensory and motor regions, and probably face navigation, and I left out a word, and body perception, and perhaps some of these regions that are involved in representing number and other things. Those things are likely to be similar across species. So those are not likely where we have special human stuff. But we probably have regions that other animals do not have in the same way. And I would say we probably have those for uniquely human functions, like the TPJ. Go see Rebecca's TED Talk if you haven't yet. The TPJ is selectively engaged, as her beautiful research program has shown, in thinking about other people's thoughts. Okay, that's something that chimps do in only the narrowest sense, not in anything like the full-blown sense that humans do. Okay, so probably that region is, in its human functional form, is uniquely human in the sense that if there is something homologous by other measures in animals, you know, one, it's doing something different, and two, it'd be really interesting to find out what it's doing, right? Similarly, regions that are involved in processing language and music, I was going to go present data on those, I probably won't get to it, but we've, at Fedorenko, who was then in my lab, and I have done a bunch of experiments that show, I think, pretty tightly that the brain regions engaged in processing language are in fact extremely selectively involved in processing language. And those are bound to be uniquely human as well. And similarly, we are just now working on a paper that finds brain regions that are selectively responsive when you listen to music as opposed to any other sound. And that's a fascinating mystery because nobody even knows why we have music, what role it fulfills kind of evolutionarily, but it is uniquely and universally human. All cultures have it, all human cultures have it, and as far as anybody knows, no non-human animal has it. So anyway, there are also selective regions for that. So I think part of the answer to how we can do stuff that other animals can't is we have special brain regions that are specialized for some of these uniquely human functions. Okay? There's a whole other story about how did they get there, how did they evolve, do they have some similarities with what a sort of loosely homologous region and other animals do. All those are deeply fascinating questions, and actually on that topic, go to Stan DeHaen's talk this Friday. He'll be talking about some of that. Okay. I don't think that's the only answer. I think there's also another possible source of human cognition, and its distinctive human cognition from animals, is that we have lots and lots of cortical territory that I haven't mentioned yet today, but which is kind of like the opposite of all of these colored regions. In fact, it's the white regions in there. Those are regions that are very broadly engaged when you do anything difficult at all. They're sometimes called multiple demand regions because they get engaged for many different kinds of cognitive demand. Pretty much any difficult thing you do, those regions are engaged. Okay? And my colleague John Duncan in England has spent quite a career studying those regions, and he argues that those are the regions that are centrally involved when you solve novel problems. I mean, not only, they're also engaged when you do mundane, stupid problems that are hard, but when you solve novel problems, he thinks those regions are of the essence He also says he thinks they're of the essence in fluid intelligence. Okay, so fluid intelligence is not like things like vocabulary that you can just learn and remember, right? Fluid intelligence is more your ability to solve novel problems. And so he has argued by looking at a number of studies of patients with brain damage that if you lose some of those white regions, your IQ goes down. If you lose any of the other regions, your IQ doesn't go down. You simply become paralyzed or blind or aphasic or prosopagnosic, with your IQ remaining the same. Okay, so the idea that comes out of that is that those white regions are sort of part of the kind of general purpose, novel problem-solving fluid intelligence system. This is going way beyond the data. I'm not even totally sure I believe him on this, but it's a cool story, right? So to the extent that that's true, okay, do those regions exist in monkeys? We don't know. Something like them do exist. Some of the regions that Earl Miller and other people study in similar regions of frontal and parietal lobes do exist. And a paper just came out by Maurizio Corbetta and his colleagues running parallel studies on humans and monkeys. And they argue that something that I think is essentially these regions are disproportionately enlarged in humans compared to macaques. Okay? So again, this is going way beyond the data, but the suggestion is that part of the answer is we have some special cortical bits that do novel, qualitatively different things that animals can't do. And another part of the answer is that we have some more powerful general purpose machinery that enables us to just do new stuff. Yeah? Okay, and I'd say, this is vague, but I think there's something to it. I think that these are sort of like hardware upgrades, right? These are things that might be in the human brain that are either uniquely human or bigger in humans than in animals. But I think these hardware upgrades probably allow us to, have some software upgrades too. So what do I mean by that? I'm not exactly sure. I just sort of started making this up an hour before I came in here. But here's the kind of thing I have in mind. Kind of thing I have in mind is stuff like language, right? So the main thing we use language for is to communicate with each other. But once we have language, we can use it to talk to ourselves and organize our ideas. And I am not a fan of the idea that thought goes on in language. I know that it doesn't in mine. I'm an inarticulate person, and I am very aware of the gap between my thoughts and the linguistic correlate of them. I do not believe those are the same thing, but I do think there's an important role for language. When I go to write a grant and write up an experiment that I fully thought through and I know exactly what the argument is, I get into the third sentence and I realize, oh my God, I haven't thought about this clearly at all. So I think we use language, at least I use language, and I'm guessing other people use language, to organize their ideas in very precise, systematic ways, even for their own use, if not communicating for others. So that's like a sort of example of how you can have a system that really is, basically there to enable you to communicate with other people, but then you can use it to be smart in other ways. And the final thing I'll add to this list is each of these says, okay, here's a piece of brain that enables you to do something else, right? But I think that kind of piecemeal approach isn't going to get us there. I think it's a synergistic combination of these that's really going to explain much of how we have cumulative human culture, right? So I like to think of Wikipedia. Like, Wikipedia is one of my favorite things about human beings. Like, that it exists, that people go spend the time to put stuff on there, that it's surprisingly accurate. What an incredible thing. Like, what a fabulous species we are that we made Wikipedia, right? And so what are the elements of that? All kinds of things. The ability to communicate with each other, the interest in communicating with each other, right? I mean, imagine some nerd spending all this time perfecting some paragraph for people he or she is never going to meet. Like, that's incredible, right? So I think, this will to cooperate with non-relatives is a key part of it, but you combine that with these abilities to communicate and to organize ideas, and a synergistic combination of these can do all kinds of stuff that isn't easily accountable for by any one of them alone. Okay, so that's my speculative list. I was going to go on and talk about language, but we're out of time, and I can just summarize that by saying, yep, the brain regions that are engaged in language are remarkably specific for just language.